Welcome to GardenDC, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine, and we're aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. This episode of GardenDC, we're talking to Jan Kirsh, sculptor and landscape designer. She's lived on the eastern shore of Maryland for 35 years. And welcome to the podcast, Jan.
Thanks, Kathy. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. And I've been a long-time admirer of your sculptures and your designs, so we want to dive into both those topics. But first, let me know what's going on in your world right now during COVID. Are you busier than ever? Are you looking for work? How's it going for you?
I am thoroughly engaged. I actually haven't missed a beat. When COVID arrived in March, being deemed essential was a blessing. And I haven't looked back. I'm busy, and really enjoying the collaboration with so many very interesting clients over here on the shore.
That's great. I am hearing similar things from other designers that this is their busiest year almost ever.
I can't say that because I've been in business for a long, long time. But it is, the work is phenomenal. I'm working with folks who are so enjoying their gardens. I mean, thoroughly enjoying being on the shore, and there's just so much psychic pleasure from being out of doors. And it's been a terrific year. Absolutely.
Good. And like many of us, you have multiple titles that you wear. So like writer, speaker, and also landscape designer and sculptor. How do you divide your time between those two main titles, sculptor and landscape designer?
It varies and has varied over the years. I concentrate on the landscape design for obvious reasons in spring, summer, and fall more than the sculpture. I do try and get into the studio frequently in my busy landscape design season, but the winter does give me an opportunity to sculpt more. If I am preparing for a show, and I've been lucky enough to do that a handful of times, especially a solo show, if I'm preparing for a solo show, I don't think I sleep. I think I just work all the time at both of them and just, race back and forth. I have a studio and an office right at my house. So I just like jump out of bed and hit the ground running, and doing both basically when the time is necessary.
It's great that you can work from home. And when you're preparing for a show, and I know that there's still been some happening during these COVID times, what goes into that? Do you create new works for every show, or is it just a labeling type thing?
That's varied also, though I would say during COVID, my most recent show was at the Zenith Gallery down in D.C. on Pennsylvania Avenue. And that show was work that was already in existence. When I did the show at the Maryland Hall for the Creative Arts in Minneapolis a couple years ago, I built loads of new work. I was like on fire because I had to fill and wanted to fill a big gallery space with even like a little additional room. It was an awesome space in a really cool facility. And three-dimensional art takes up room, but you need lots of it. And that was a big push, but fun and certainly worthwhile.
And can you describe for our listeners your style of sculptures?
My sculpture, it's been described as sensual, whimsical. I do fruit and vegetable sculpture. I I try to find the essence of a form, and I use real fruits and vegetables as models frequently, and and then there's a point where the piece kind of takes on its own character. And I might, like I remember one time going to the local farmer's market and buying the most magnificent onion. And I raced home and started sculpting it. It was fabulous. But there was a point where I was far enough along on the piece that I took the onion in the kitchen and, sauteed it. It was, it sort of served its purpose to get me going. And then I jump forward, and that's when the pieces really take on their, kind of personality. And they're, each piece has plenty of that.
And I think the most striking thing about your sculptures is their size and how they might be used in the landscape. So if listeners are picturing a peach that looks just like a peach, think of it more as like a peach on steroids.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I do love the big pieces, and that happens. Are you ready for the elevator pitch, Kathy?
Totally.
Okay, so this is my quick explanation is that I make my pieces in an oil-based clay, and I sculpt them at a reasonable size. It's manageable, and I can move them around. But once the piece is done, I have a mold made, and I do a one-off casting of each piece in plaster. And then I worked the plaster piece just to death until it's like absolutely as perfect as I can get it. And I love the texture and the feel of it. And at that point, I have my work scanned, and they make a 3D model. So I'm sort of have one foot in the 16th century, and then the other one is firmly planted in the 21st century. That technology helps me take that 3D model, and I can enlarge a piece to virtually any size that I want. So it really opens the door wide. I have, in fact, I have a 37-inch aubergine, a big purple eggplant that's sitting on Main Street in Ellicott City. And the model for that piece was only about 12 inches tall. So that's how it happens.
That's so fascinating. And I'm going to ask the hard question next, Jan, which is why fruits and vegetables? What drew you to that subject matter?
Oh boy, yeah, you're not the first, and I guess it's because I love to cook, I love to eat, I like to grow vegetables. I remember being a student 150 years ago in college and studying photography, and asking my professor if it was okay if I, did some program or class about. I think I was told to go off and do some still life work, and I just found the produce aisle in the grocery store totally inspiring and fabulous, and went to the man who managed the produce department and asked if I could take pictures. And I think that's sort of what got me going. It's just like a love of the essential shapes and forms of what nature produces. Always have found them fascinating. So, and then it has just grown from there, on and on. And I'm not ready to move on to the next theme yet. I still think there are others. There are others in my future that I haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah, and I would think that the colors are so vibrant in your work. Who are your influences?
Well, the fruit itself, I think, but I guess like pop artists, back in the day when I'm gonna like, I don't want to tell you how old I am, but it's sort of like Andy Warhol-ish, and that, there's an awful lot of work that was done back in the 60s and 70s that I think was influential. And I just, I'm like surrounded by nature, so it's not as much influenced by a particular artist as it is being thrust into like the center of crazy color all season long as I'm designing and enjoying gardens. I just, it's like, how could you not notice purple, red, orange, and yellow? It's hard to miss.
Yeah, and just scrolling through Instagram these days, you can see everybody's peppers that they've discovered. Even if you
Yes.
don't like to eat hot peppers, they sure make a great photography subject.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And I have, yeah. If you look at my website where my sculpture portfolio lives, I'm sort of top heavy on peppers because they're fabulous. No question. They're just really just the shapes and forms and colors are awesome. And I think Weston's photographs of the green pepper that I think was influential in the early days. But I can't pin the color on any specific artist. I think it's just because my eyes are open.
Hmm. See, I was thinking you were going to say Magritte, who is one of my favorite
Yeah.
artists for the green apples.
Okay.
But
Well,
yeah.
no. Well, you can pretend. And I'm always open to suggestions. I'm
Hmm.
very collaborative. I just had a conversation with someone who saw my pineapple at a local show in Easton, and she was just in love with the pineapple, and we just we had a conversation about like how big is it and where will it fit and is it going to sit on a base, and it was yeah, no, it's like this, and she wasn't sure what she was going to do with the piece. She just knew that she loved it. And there is like, we just began today this collaborative process of, is it going to work for her? Where is it going to work? How is it going to be set? What size is the base? It's like, yeah, it's really lovely give and take when a patron reaches out to me.
That's interesting to hear about the client relationship in art, because you always think of the solitary artist creating things because that's within them, but the real world practicality obviously is that you're working directly with people who will be incorporating your art into their household or landscapes.
Exactly, and I think that and you know this because you talk to garden designers all the time. The collaborative portion of building a garden for someone is just, in my humble opinion, a really important facet. You're not designing a garden um, for you, you're designing a garden for someone else. And that's why the conversation and the collaborative effort, is just like wildly important. And I myself, I love that part. I thrive on it. It's just, picking someone's brain and finding out what makes them tick, and why does their heart sing at a particular color or type of plant, or what's going to draw them out of their house into the garden. And it might be a piece of my sculpture that does that, but it also might be a particular tree in bloom, or a sweep of some kind of flower, or just it's like chatter and chatter and more chatter, all about art and form and shape and color. It's yeah, no, it's like what makes going to work a pleasure for me.
And that obviously has a lot of crossover with your design work and working with clients there. And let's pivot to talk about your design side a little bit. So I would say maybe share a little bit about your style of garden design and your philosophy.
That's a big open. Do you have like an extra hour and a half?
Sure.
It's there's like, oh boy, I've been a garden designer for, dare I say, 37 years. So it's yeah, I've been at it for a long time, and I think there's not like one style, though I do hear from people in my community, real estate agents, and house builders and architects. I mean, people who have the occasion to, poke around in other people's gardens, that they can see or recognize some quality that's somewhat universal in my work. And it's I think it's a sense of just like paying attention to scale. I think the other thing that I think about is how it feels to move through a garden. I'm really conscious of not like standing in one place and just having a view. It's more like movement, and how are you going to walk from here to there to here to there? That I think has, that's like influenced my style. I certainly have been influenced by the native landscape here on the Eastern Shore. So I think my gardens do, for the most part, have a certain feeling of belonging to the environment, and the quality of the plants and the light affect my design. And I also am super conscious of the architecture, and I want the garden to be complementary to the house, and not sort of overwhelm it and not compete. I think architects kind of enjoy working, collaboratively with me, because it's like, okay, you can go first. And, I know that the house is really setting the tone, and my job is to, improve the house by having a garden that complements it. That I think that helps. And I'm super lucky because I do design a good majority of my projects are riverfront, waterfront, Eastern Shore properties. And so it's like I've got great bones, and they're already pretty. I just make them better. How's that?
Perfect. Yeah, and you're so lucky to be in the area you are for those beautiful vistas that you can borrow.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the gardens, Kathy, don't. I try really hard to, like, if someone has, they're lucky enough to have a beautiful western sunset view, or some of my clients have this like southern point, like poking out into one of our creeks or rivers. It's, there's just like so much natural drama already, that sometimes the garden doesn't, you don't want to compete. It's like, who's going to fight with the sunset? I don't think so. So, my gardens in that case may need to be kind of subtle, and just sort of playing second fiddle, but we're supporting cast. And that, I definitely pay attention to that as well. And I want my gardens to always kind of tell the story of which season we're in. Like if someone were dropped into one of my gardens from outer space, and they're like in one of my clients' houses, and they're looking out the window, I want them to know that we're in the height of summer, or that we're in the dead of winter, or that, oh boy, here we go, we're in those very early days of spring. You should be able to look at the garden and pinpoint almost to the week where we are in the calendar.
I like that seasonality and sensibility, that your gardens are almost echoing or playing second fiddle, as you say, to nature.
For sure, for sure. And you don't, I guess I'm not criticizing, but there are so many gardens, it seems that they're like super heavy with evergreens. And, you can look at the garden in February and then you look at the same garden in August, you look at the same garden in June, and it's like you can't tell because there's just, there's too much the same. But mine have that, that it's November when you're looking at one of the gardens I've designed, just because, that's how a November garden looks. It's sort of like borrowing from nature. You're absolutely right.
I think you actually finally solved a mystery for me why I don't love formal boxwood gardens. I think you actually finally explained to me
There you
why,
go.
because you can always look out on them, every single day of the year. It's the same garden.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. No, boxwood are great. I do use them. I love the fact that the deer don't eat them. That's a good thing. And the Eastern Shore, we've got a lot of really beautiful historic homes. And boy, oh boy, if you didn't use boxwood over here, it's like, it doesn't fit. But there are other things to incorporate. The boxwood are just a player for me. They're not the big, they're not the main menu. That it's, there's more to it.
Do you have favorite plant families or maybe even specific plants? I'm thinking of specific grasses maybe that you like to use.
Yeah, I like muley grass a lot, the Muhlenbergia. I used to use more of the miscanthus, but I still occasionally will use them, but not as many. Because the panicum, the switchgrass, are so present here on the shore. I think panicum may be a real favorite of mine. I love spirobolus. I use a ton of sedges. Oh my gosh, there are a lot of grasses. I have one project in particular. It's one of my clients who's a DC resident, in fact, who has a second house over here. And when we started working together back in 2011, I think it was, and it was like going through the interview process and just trying to, figure out what makes him tick and what's he looking for. This was he basically said, I am a fan of grasses, and the more grasses you use, the better. And we have, and it's been awesome. It just, and his garden really looks like it belongs on the Miles River. It's just like, it makes sense. I have some exotics too, but there are a lot of native grasses, and some of them evergreen, some of them not. It's, I think in terms of plant families, I guess grasses are a real favorite, but I have a really wide array of plants that I incorporate. And, the fun for me is to take the knowledge I have about so many plants and hone my list, like really refine it so that there's a lot of like textural play going on between the plants. I'm definitely a texture freak. I love color, but the gardens look cool because there's so much textural difference and interest. I can't pin. It's sort of like, who influenced my color? I don't think there's an answer. And it's like asking someone with 5 kids, who's their favorite? I don't have one, Kathy. Sorry. That's the hardest part for me is maybe limiting the list. I want to do a lot of repetition in the garden. So I just really work hard at making that plant list happen for a client's garden. It's like all about form and shape and texture. And then I start plugging in the plants. It's not the other way around. I'm like painting a picture, and once I get the bones of the picture done, then I start looking seriously at okay, if I need somebody who's spiky or, rounded or wispy or, whatever the form is that I'm looking for. It's like, let me figure that out first, and then the plants, the specifics of the plants show up. Does that make sense? That makes sense to you?
Yeah, and it is makes sense, and it's very interesting from a home gardener point of view, where you're very plant centric and you're going to the garden center or a plant sale and you pick out a bunch of plants and then you go home and you say, where do these fit? Because you bought them with no plan in mind, but you just fell in love with the plants.
Yes. Oh yeah. No, I can. I mean, I can do the same thing. I mean, my own garden is clearly a collector's garden, but I still, I'm still driven by like plant combinations and just, I do quite a few what I call hedgerows or privacy borders. I mean, you guys over there on the western side of the bay have the same issues with folks who want to have a sense of enclosure. So I'm called upon to build, what I refer to as my hedgerows as a privacy border between two property owners. And those privacy borders or those hedgerows are like, they can be, 300, 400, 500 feet in length. I mean, this is is a good stretch. And I look at that as a challenging kind of painterly garden solution. So it's a matter of looking at the space and solving problems, and making it feel enclosed and private. But all the while, it's like you're painting with plants. It's like a different way of looking at it. And but I totally understand and support your, sort of plant addiction and habit, because I'm there too. I won't deny that I also see something and I go, oh, I just love this plant. I walk around my clients' gardens and I sometimes covet things that I've done for them, but I can't like bring every single thing home that I've ever planted for everyone and put it in my garden. That would be silly. I would have no room to walk. It would be too jammed. I only have I have like just under 2 acres, and it's, you got to have some breathing room in a garden too. That's also equally important, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I need to adopt some of these design sensibilities because, I don't have any breathing room
Uh,
on my little corner garden here.
All right. Well, I'll come see you. I'll come see you when the weather's right and
Yeah.
and we're traveling again. And
Yes.
yes, I'll wave my arms around. I'll be happy to give you a consultation.
Well, thank you. And that does bring up, and you had referred to the client you've been working for years. What is your client process? Do you meet with them first and then mutually decide to work together, or how do you usually work it?
Well, someone calls me, or I've been recommended to them, or they find me on the web, or there are all kinds of ways. The real estate agent that sold them the house might recommend me, or the builder who's doing some renovations, or the architect that's drawing for them, and there's just any number of ways, or maybe a neighbor. Word of mouth is pretty strong around here. I do a little bit of advertising, but there's a lot of chatter in our community. I think that's how I think many of my clients have found me. Though I must say that the internet is also like a great source of client, just new people finding my work. But once there is that initial phone call and the project sounds interesting, and we just like dance around each other and talk and make sure it feels comfortable, then I will make a site visit. It's not really important for them to come to my office. It's way more important for me to go and visit them in their home. This is when COVID's done, I'll be happy again when I can run in and out of people's houses at whim and just look out their windows and make sure I catch their views. But we do have a good, hour plus, it seems to run into hour and a half, 2 hours, that first visit when we walk the site, and I take volumes of notes, and we're just sort of scoping out what the wish list is all about and what the practical needs are, and do they want a swimming pool, and do they want a fire pit, and do we need a shade structure? They're just any number of drivers. And very often a client will ask me for a master plan, or like a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan. It depends on the size of the property and how eager they are to get going. So it's, there's lots of conversation. Then the other thing that I have found useful over the years is to send my prospective clients off on a garden tour. And they have a chance to go to 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 of my finished gardens of varying ages and sizes, and properties that kind of relate to what they may have, and it gives them a chance to see some finished work, to just kind of spark their interest, and then we have more conversation and I get feedback. They often take pictures and they share places like that really work for them or not. So it's the design process doesn't really get going immediately. There's a lot of conversation and really like feeling out the needs first. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, and it sounds like it's definitely a collaboration, and garden design or landscape design is not for those who aren't, let's just say they're not people persons. So it's definitely about the relationship.
Yeah, and it seems to me the folks who choose to work with me, they really care about their gardens, and they may or may not work in them themselves. They may very well have a landscape crew, or they might have a caretaker that takes, does the actual work for them. But the folks that are attracted to my work seem to really have an affinity and a desire to really make their home more special, and just a reflection of themselves and their personalities and how they want to entertain. And even if they're not like real super social types, it's just a matter of like making their own little cave feel perfect in their own way. It's like we talk about taking a glass of wine or a cup of coffee and heading out the door into the garden. And a lot of my folks, that's, they're here maybe just for the weekend, or maybe they're, part-timers, and it's like 4 or 5 days on the shore and the rest of the time at the, back on the city side, on your side, or vice versa. But when they're here, the out of doors is really calling their name, and they, they're like fully participating in their outdoor environment. And my clients have something to say. That's why, I talk a lot, but I really do listen a lot too.
That is such an important skill to have. And I wanted to roll it back a little bit and ask about how you originally got into gardening and growing and garden design and art. So maybe talk a little bit about your childhood and how you came to become a landscape designer.
Oh boy. Well, I do. When people ask me questions similar to that, that's a lot, But people have asked me similar questions, and I'll try to remember to answer everything. I made my first pot out of clay when I was 5. And I absolutely remember, doing it and being in a little art class in the summer of my 5th year, and that kind of started me off with art, thinking that it was I wasn't thinking down the road that it was going to be, my future work. I mean, who the heck knew at 5? But I do remember really enjoying making a three-dimensional object. There's no question that was really fun. And then I just kept my hand in clay and in art of all sorts all the way through elementary school. I went to a friend's school in South Jersey where I lived and had a great art program and wonderful art teacher. And just, it was like that was one of my happiest classes as I was growing up. And I think I guess the horticulture happened naturally. I had a grandmother who was a great gardener, though I think she was like over it or didn't, she was getting older by the time I realized that I liked horticulture. So we didn't overlap, but I think I probably inherited her genes. So the growing part came along later. When I lived in Florida, I recognized that there was something really cool about tropical plants growing in a garden. So that got me going on that score. And the art, it's like the art and horticulture have been both present for a long, like forever, like my entire life. I think I've always done some of both. The art was the major player in the beginning. Though, Kathy, I hadn't thought about this in years and years and years, but when I was a little kid, I used to have a boyfriend, I mean, not like a boyfriend, I was too little, but a friend who happened to be a boy who lived next door. And I think I was only in about kindergarten, and I remember building a set of steps in the side of a ravine with this young guy, and thinking that was like the coolest thing to do. We were, using shovels and digging and making steps. And then I do remember when I was a little bit older, probably in, I don't know, 4th, 5th grade, building tree forts, again with a male friend. I was friends with a lot of little boys. I was a bit of a tomboy. So it's like those early experiences put me outside. And I guess I liked the sense of accomplishment, like the feeling that I was actually making something. Does that answer? Does that answer? I mean, I hadn't thought about this in years. Good question. You got me thinking.
Well, I'm glad that brought back some good memories. That sounds like a wonderful childhood too.
Yeah, no, I was pretty lucky. Yeah, my parents had a place that had about, I think it was like 12 acres of woods. And I spent a lot of time with poison ivy, unfortunately. But I also, I remember being in the woods and, taking walks with my dad and seeing skunk cabbage and thinking it was like super cool. And my mom grew lily of the valley up and down these stone steps that we had. And so, I wasn't like a super young horticulturalist by any means. It didn't happen till I was probably in my late teens or early 20s. But I think that there's certain memories that got me going as a kid. And I think just the pleasure of being out of doors. That's one of the joys of being a garden designer, that, you can be outside a lot of the time. You don't have to be inside working at your desk. I do a lot of my drawings on site. It's very common for my clients to see me literally just plunk down sitting in the middle of their driveway with my mobile drawing board and sketching away. I think the little tomboy didn't really go away, even though I'm like not that young anymore.
It does sound like you kept a lot of that inside you. And when you're working and designing in the garden, do you ever work with clients who ask you, they might have an art piece or a sculpture on hand that they want to work into the landscape? And if they do, how do you work with that and orient it?
Yes, the answer is yes. It doesn't happen real frequently, but it does happen occasionally. And it's, it's just a matter of, I guess it's like focusing on where and how do they want to see the piece. I'm really big on like seeing a piece of sculpture from the main room of the house or from your kitchen table. Where do you spend most of your time? There's kind of that is a driver. Sometimes it's really fun to see a piece of art if you have a long driveway and you're headed home and we can use light in the garden particularly. It's really fun to have a piece of art that you see coming and going. That's really fun. I have at my own personal house, I have a bright red 36-inch long chili pepper at the end of my driveway. And it is lighted. And coming home at night in the wintertime, it's kind of fun to turn the corner into my driveway and see my chili pepper. So it depends on where you want, how you want to view it. If you're sitting down at your patio at the pool, or if you're on your terrace and you have this like long view into the lawn, or even a short view if it's a teeny garden, it's like, do you want to put the piece at sitting height to be viewed best from the table, or is it a piece that you're going to be walking by as you're headed from one garden room to the next? There are a lot of reasons. One of the coolest pieces, I don't even remember where it was, but I was on a garden tour with either the Garden Writers, now called GardenCom, or I was with a group from APLD, I can't remember, but we visited a home where there was a big, dark swimming pool, and there was this fabulous figurative piece of a kind of a chunky, overweight woman sitting right at the edge of the pool. And I thought that the juxtaposition to the water was just fabulous. So it's like whatever makes you tick. I have 3 habanero chili peppers that are sitting in a garden at one of my actually landscape client and art patron's house. It's like a joy for me when both both of my worlds align. These folks purchased 3 habanero peppers. They're 3 different colors, and they're set on their concrete bases at 3 different heights, oriented differently, but they see them when they're at their pool. They see them from the deck, and they're viewed from inside, from the kitchen, if you're at the workstation, at the island, or if you're at the dining table, where it's like, where do you spend that much time that, and we arranged to have these 3 habanero peppers, fill the need in a lot of different ways. It was, that was a super challenge and fun.
Yeah, those sound like really cool focal points for the garden as well.
Yeah, I think, you asked me before about color. I think part of the driver for me to make my work like super colorful is because winter can be so quiet in the garden. We're just like losing our beautiful fall leaves, and we're left with evergreens. But I kind of miss all those like hot colors that I use in perennials and flowering shrubs, and it's like all those plants go to sleep, and we have a fairly gray, brown, green color scheme in the wintertime. So if my clients love color, adding something like the habanero peppers or a big purple eggplant, it's like you still have color, and it gives the garden a just like another winter facet. It's sort of like that's when the sculpture really shines, because the plantings are they become secondary, and then it gives the chance for the sculpture to like step up to the plate and be the lead character, and then maybe the sculpture takes a little bit of a step back in the spring and summer when all the bulbs start blooming and all the flowers start coming out and all the flowering shrubs are doing their thing. So it's it's like this symbiotic relationship. It works. It works. But those bright colors, I love seeing my, I have a red chili pepper and I have a purple artichoke, and I have 5 asparagus of 3 different shades in my own personal garden. So as I'm coming down my driveway, it's like they're welcoming me all winter long. I just, it's like there's still color in my garden, even if it's the dreariest February day. And that's why, because I've got, I have like lime green, lavender, and trying to remember the other color asparagus that I have out there, but they're just, they're like beacons. They're really cool.
That sounds like a wonderful view, and it kind of reminds me of those Corton steel Cotswold sheep that are at the Morris Arboretum as you enter up that hillside. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not. Tell me about them.
So when you come to the Morris Arboretum outside of Philadelphia, you're kind of circling up a hillside, a very steep hillside, but you're going up it diagonally. And in the distance, there's these Corton steel cutouts of sheep, and they're a little bit bigger than life size. Yeah, they're like
awesome. Yep.
Yeah, in the big meadow, and depending on how the sunlight is coming at certain times of day, it can look like there's real sheep until you drive by a little closer and you're like, no, that's a flat sheep.
Yeah, no, that sounds really cool. I saw that same effect. I wonder if it was the same artist. It was out in Napa, California, I think, at an art center there that they have, like sort of an artful sheep. And I can't remember if it was Corton or not, but it's a wonderful and whimsical look. I agree with you. It's, dotting the hillside, especially. We don't have too many hillsides over here on the shore.
No.
But I love the imagery. I love that imagery. Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. Yep.
I'm looking it up. The artist is Charles Leyland, an American artist, and he is modern. So yeah, could be the same one that you saw in California.
Yeah. Oh, that's very cool. Yeah. No, looking at sculpture in public places is it's always inspirational. I still remember the feeling of being in Chicago and looking at that, what they call the bean, that giant reflective sculpture.
Yeah.
I just, it's fabulous. And I remember seeing Henry Moore had an exhibit a number of years ago now at the New York Botanical Garden. And it's like there are works that I may forget specifically which work was where, but it's just the feeling of walking through space and discovering a piece of art. There's just, something really delightful about it. And it's just, there's that relationship between the plantings and a piece of sculpture that, it's like you can't find that in the museum. It's different when you're out in the environment. No. Have you been to the Nasher? Is that out in Dallas? Is that a sculpture garden that you have visited?
No, I haven't been to that one. Tell me about that.
Yeah, Dallas is Dallas, but the Nasher is, there's a modern art museum, and it's not a huge sculpture garden behind the museum, but I just remember feeling that it was so well done. I can't tell you who designed it, but the way you move through the space, and you just sort of have this natural progression through this landscaped area, some of it's very geometric, and other areas are softer corners. I remember there's a Henry Moore reclining nude right next to like a rectangular shaped body of water, and if I remember correctly, there was a weeping willow not that far off, and the juxtaposition of the water and the sparkle and the willow leaves, and and then this Moore sculpture. It was, it's like I've got this little picture in my brain that I saw this years ago, but it's still there. It's I think it's all those elements, Kathy, that we get to use as garden designers, that are that's what brings the garden alive, and then sculpture is just one part of it. That's why it's so, for me, it's like when someone says, will you please, sell me a piece of sculpture, and then I want you to cite it in my garden. That's about as good a request as I get, because I get to wear both hats. It's super fun.
Yeah, I just looked up the Nasher, so it's Nasher for those listeners, and it's in downtown Dallas. Next time I go to Dallas, I'll definitely have to visit there. It looks beautiful, and I would say my favorite sculpture garden outside of the greater DC area is the Walker in Minneapolis. Have you been to that one?
No, I've never been to Minneapolis. I'll put that on the list.
Oh, definitely go. If you go, it sits on the river, and it's part of the Walker Modern Art Museum, and the outdoor sculpture garden is immense. And you've probably seen the giant cherry on a spoon in a postcard. That's part of their garden. And you see that picture, iconic picture, all the time. But when you see it in person, it's huge. It's like laying down is probably like a 6-story building, the length of it. Wow. And what I didn't realize is the shiny cherry actually has water flowing over it.
Oh, very cool.
So I was like, oh, that is not shown in the photos. You don't even think about that part of it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, Minneapolis is on my list. I will definitely get there. Thank you for the little boost.
Yeah, it's a beautiful city and a beautiful sculpture garden. Well, do you have any local DC, Maryland, Virginia, or Pennsylvania, or Delaware sculpture gardens that you like to visit?
I think the PepsiCo isn't. That one's more. That's New York. That's Purchase, New York. I think that was one that I loved and remember visiting. I used, it sounds sort of old-fashioned, but I used to spend a lot of time as a high school kid over at the Rodin Museum in Philadelphia. And it's not like my work is his or his, I don't know that we can talk about my work in the same sentence, but I just remember being in that museum a lot. And it just, I guess by osmosis, it just sort of like filtered into my brain. And that's like an old timey favorite. In Washington, Washington is a city with tons of sculpture around. I love Chanticleer, even though it's not a sculpture garden. I think of the gardens that are up near, Longwoods and Winterthur and that neck of the woods. I think Chanticleer is a favorite because they use gardens and plants in a whimsical way. And the structure is kind of interesting there. There's also a garden, it's not anywhere close. It was, it's the one that was near, I've been to Copenhagen, and there was a sculpture garden called, I think it's Louisiana. You can check me out on that one too. I visited many years ago, and I think, as I think back at the places I've been and gardens that I've seen, that's one that strikes me as rather influential. I think that one also is like, if you get across the pond again, that would be a really good one to go see. It was a beautiful, just like a walking outdoor, beautiful space with tons of art. That's a good one. And the other the other thing when I think about art and travel is I remember I've been to Florence I think twice, and just like being in Florence, you don't even have to go to a museum. It's just like the whole city feels like an art museum to me. And I'm sure one of the newest museums in the DC area is what is it? Glenn's? Is it Glenstone?
Glenstone?
Yeah.
Yep, Glenstone.
Yeah, Glenstone is. I've been there twice so far, and just really enjoyed the sculpture was like awesome, but the art is fabulous, and the way the architecture and the landscape and the art are all so integrated. It's like you don't know where one starts and the other one stops. It's really beautifully done. I think everyone in the Washington area should go there one at a time, carefully.
Yes. Yeah. Glenstone is definitely one of those immersive experiences.
Absolutely.
Where you're going to spend the better part of a day. You're not going to run through it in a half hour.
No, nor do you want to. Yeah. No, that's a real gift to the Washington area. There's no question. I thought that was like super special. And I've been, like I say, I've been twice, and when we start traveling again and doing things, we will do that. Once we move on to the next phase of our lives, I think, things are getting better, maybe sooner, later. Who knows?
Hopefully, and by next summer, hopefully you can get out back to Glenstone.
Yep.
And for listeners, I was going to recommend, of course, on the National Mall, there's both the Hirshhorn Sculpture Garden and the National Gallery of Art Sculpture Garden, which have some amazing pieces. And then there's a little known sculpture garden that you can only visit. I guess they have their open house about once a year, and maybe you've been there too, Jan, which is the Ford Hook Farm, the headquarters of Burpee in Doylestown, PA. Have you been to that one?
No, I certainly have been to the sculpture garden at the Hirshhorn about 100 times. So
yeah,
I agree. No, I agree with you on our local sculpture gardens. They're fabulous. But no, I haven't been to the Burpee one. Sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, they open up once or twice a year for a weekend to come and look at their trial plants.
Uh-huh.
Usually it's toward the end of July, early August,
Yep.
and then you're encouraged to go and look at the trial gardens. And then you're like, wait a minute, over here is an incredible sculpture collection and beautiful landscape of just like rolling meadows and different annual flower combinations. And that was a joy to find. So look up Ford Hook Farm and get on Burpee's mail list, because they send that postcard or email with that invitation about once a year, and hopefully, of course, post-COVID, they'll open it back up again for that.
Yeah, I did know of that, because I think it might have been this either last summer or this summer that I had conversation with someone at Burpee, and I thought about going, because I now that you describe it, I know what you're talking about. But I was going to go more as a landscape person, not so much a sculptor. I didn't even realize I was going to go look at the trial gardens. Oh, that's so wonderful! What a little secret that you've just shared with the world.
Yeah, it's definitely something to stumble across and be like, okay, now this is a nice bonus, and I could totally see one of your sculptures in that landscape as well, Jan.
Oh, good. Thank you. Well, put in a good word for me. Oh, the other garden that we haven't, I don't know what you think of it, Grounds for Sculpture up near Trenton, New Jersey. Do you know that place?
I do, but it's been so long since I've been there.
Yeah, it's kind of, most unusual, and I guess the sense is sometimes I feel like it's like so much work and so many diverse pieces, and it's like sensory overload. But it is if you're like on your way to New York or on your way home from New York and you want a little side trip, that's that can be a fun one too. That's, if you're really into sculpture, that's a fun one. And they have some really cool exhibits. Yeah, no, we could just spend our lives like bouncing around from sculpture garden to sculpture garden.
And that wouldn't be a bad thing.
No, I'm thinking, okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
I think you and I need to plan a road trip.
Definitely. We'll just make a compass point to compass point.
You got it. Sounds like that.
So for our listeners, how can they view your online portfolio of both your sculptures and landscape work?
Easiest way is to just go to jankirshstudio.com, and that's KIRSH.com, jankirshstudio.com. And I have a little store online now as well. So yeah, we're easily found. If you just Google my name, something's bound to pop up.
And I'll definitely put a link to that in the show notes. And I always want to spell your name with a C in it, like the German word for cherry.
Yes.
But
don't go there.
Don't go there. I'm sure that happens a lot, but so for listeners, it's Jan, just like it sounds, and then KIRSH.
Thanks, Kath.
Well, thank you so much for talking about your art, your design, and your life with us today.
It was actually, this was like a really fun and totally unexpected pleasure. I didn't know that I had that much to say, but I guess I do. Thank you for asking. And then, Kathy, your questions were really first class. Got me thinking. So good work on your part, my dear. That was excellent. Really had some fun.
Well, thank you, Jan, and welcome to the podcast world.
Thank you.
Plant profile, rosemary. Rosemary is a woody perennial or subshrub. Rosemary's Latin name has been recently changed to reflect the fact that it is actually part of the sage or salvia family. It comes in many forms, from prostrate to vertical, and in foliage shades that range from blue-green to golden yellow. Rosemary ARP is a reliably hardy variety for the Mid-Atlantic region. It can withstand our freeze-thaw, freeze-winter cycles, which can often be the demise of other rosemary varieties. The key is good drainage and full sun. Don't overwater it, as it is susceptible to root rot. An ideal situation is to plant it overhanging a rock wall. Be sure to give it room, as it can spread to 4 feet wide and high. Rosemary is drought-tolerant and deer-proof. Pollinators love it. Honeybees are especially attracted to the tiny blue or white flowers. There is usually no need to fertilize it, though a little fish fertilizer occasionally will not hurt. To start new plants, it is best to take cuttings, as it is difficult to grow rosemary from seed. When using it in cooking, snip off young stems and leaves for the freshest taste. You can take up to a third of the plant at any one time, then let it recover before harvesting from it again. At holiday time, you will see potted up rosemary plants sold in grocery stores. These are often quite root-bound and will not live long in indoor conditions. Take cuttings liberally and use them for cooking and decoration. Then discard the plant when it starts to decline. Try growing rosemary in your garden today. You can grow that. For this week's What's Blooming in the Garden segment, I wanted to focus on indoor blooms. Now is the time of year that days are getting short and we're turning to some bright colors for our holiday plants. And I have an upcoming webinar on that very topic, and also indoor bulb forcing. If you're interested in that, go to our website, washingtongardener.com or washingtongardener.blogspot.com. And in the keyword search, enter webinar or webinars, and you should see the last couple webinars that we're offering this year. And the one on holiday plants and indoor bulb forcing demonstration is taking place December 6th at 2 p.m. That's a Sunday. And if you can't make it live to listen to the session, you can still register for it and then be sent the recording afterwards. So in my indoor plant world, I have a bunch of violets, a little violet collection on my bedroom windowsill, which is thankfully a very deep windowsill. I'm very thankful in this old house that I have windows that are about 18 inches or more wide. So it gives me plenty of plant demonstration and homes for them, of course, and also the cats' napping spots. And nearby that, I have some purple foliage plants and also my Thanksgiving cactus. And yes, that is Thanksgiving cactus, not Christmas cactus. That's being sold in most stores these days. And if you see it in bloom now, it is that Thanksgiving cactus. And in that talk that I have coming up, that webinar, I'll talk about some more of the differences between the different kinds of Thanksgiving, Christmas, and even Easter cactus. But mine is blooming up its storm. It's kind of a fuchsia lipstick pink. It should go on for a few more weeks, and then it usually drops its blooms, and then it has a little bit of a sporadic rebloom next spring, summer. The other thing I'm looking forward to is the box full of amaryllis that I have put into dormancy in my attic. I've cut back the foliage, I've stopped watering them, and I'll pull them out in about a month or so to get them started on their new process. And then the last thing I'm enjoying indoors are a couple of orchids I've gifted to myself to get me through this winter blah short day period. And I recommend you do the same. It doesn't have to be orchids, could be anything indoor blooming, maybe just a fresh bouquet of flowers, maybe some cuttings from your own garden, maybe some paper whites you force into bloom. You know, treat yourself in these gray, brown, early winter, late fall days, and have a wonderful holiday season. Thank you for listening to GardenDC. You can become a listener supporter by going to anchor.fm/Kathy-Gents/support. For as little as 99 cents a month, you can become a listener supporter, and we'll give you a shout out in a future episode. Another way to support GardenDC is to go to WashingtonGardener.com and subscribe to Washington Gardener magazine. You can find Washington Gardener online at WashingtonGardener.com, on Twitter at WDC Gardener, on Instagram at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook.com at Washington Gardener Magazine.